Well, this is certainly a wonderful honor for me to be inducted into the Colorado Tennis Hall of Fame. And it's a privilege to be with the inductees tonight and those of the past. You know, there's so many people that I need to thank that have played a part in my life, especially my family, my lovely wife, and many of the friends, my children, my grandchildren, and many of the friends that are here tonight. I also want to thank the Colorado USTA and also the Colorado Junior Tennis Foundation. Being in the Hall of Fame means a great deal to me, and I think that it recognizes a life of tennis. And what I'd like to talk to a little bit tonight about is all the changes that I've seen in the game. And as the video clip pointed out, I started playing at a very early age. My dad was a tennis coach in St. Louis, and my brother was a professional tennis player. He was 3 years older. For the first 30 years, I let Butch be the better player. These last 30 years, I could beat him. At 15, I was a pretty good junior, and my brother was playing Davis Cup. And as Ed pointed out, they used to play the Davis Cup the weekend before a Grand Slam. And so in New York, the weekend before the Four Stills Championship, the Davis Cup was played. So what that clip didn't point out was that I had to take a bus from St. Louis to New York. It was 2 nights in a day. And I remember that just as it went through East St. Louis, the air conditioning went out. So I arrived in New York. I didn't have any money, so I had to sleep in my brother's hotel room on the floor. And Billy Talbot was the tournament director of the Nationals, which became the U.S. Open. He was also the tournament director of the Davis Cup. And he said, "Junior, bring your racket out, and Monday morning, if somebody doesn't show up, I'll put you in." And sure enough, somebody didn't show up. I'd never seen a grass court. They didn't win the Davis Cup that year, by the way. And sure enough, somebody did show up, so I went out and played, and I won my first match. And now that's a change that's taken place. I'm going to point out some other changes. Getting into a Grand Slam event today is a lot harder than just Junior bring out your racket. And we mentioned, we highlighted the Arthur Ashe Award. And one of the great privileges I had was growing up with Arthur. Arthur and I were the same age. We competed for years, and we continued our friendship throughout. When he was in Miami, I had the tournament in Miami. He was our commentator, and we went ahead and eventually built a tennis complex in Miami in Liberty City called the Ash Buchholz Tennis Center. But talk about change. Arthur moved to St. Louis to play. We had a number of very good junior players, and he moved to St. Louis to play. And this was in 1960, and this was before the Civil Rights Act of 1961. At that time, in 1960, you had segregation. And Arthur went to the only all-black high school, and I went to the only all-white high school, and we had to compete against each other. And that year, we also traveled throughout the South, and we played 3 or 4 tournaments in Alabama, Tennessee. Then we eventually went down to Miami, and we couldn't stay in hotels. We had to stay in dormitories or YMCA's. Couldn't go to restaurants. The only place we'd go was Howard Johnson, because that was interstate commerce. We couldn't go to movie theaters. And so that's a change, and thank goodness we've gone through that change, and we certainly have seen that change throughout tennis. I went on to Trinity University and played tennis there, and went to Wimbledon a couple times, played the Nationals 4 more times. And at that time, they had indoor championships, but they didn't have any indoor tennis clubs back then. There were very few throughout the United States, so you had to play in armories, and you had to play on very hard, very fast courts. And I remember that, and playing on those courts, I always said to myself, it'd be great to have an indoor tennis club. And a couple of years later, moved to St. Louis, moved back to St. Louis, and started law school. In my first year in law school, we were able to build an indoor tennis club called the Buchholz Racket Club. And then in between my second and third year of law school, we went ahead and built a club in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania called the Pittsburgh Racket Club. Not very original names, but anyway, I graduated in 1970, and I ran my first professional tennis tournament at that time. Now, open tennis came about in 68. In 1970, I had 16 of the greatest players in the world, and the prize money was $19,000. My brother and I started the Lipton in 1985. We sold it in 2000. The prize money was $7 million when we sold it. That's changed.
Yeah.
Law school, I moved to Colorado and started building indoor tennis clubs, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But indoor tennis is going through change, and they've moved into not only indoor tennis clubs but also fitness clubs. And we have 4 fitness clubs in Fort Collins. And so I'd like just to have the team of the Miramont Lifestyle Fitness just sort of wave your hands. And I want to thank you guys for coming, and especially the tennis team that we have. You guys do a great job. You know, there have been so many changes that I've seen and been a part of. You know, wooden rackets to composites. White tennis balls to yellow tennis balls. You may not remember this, but in the 60s they brought out yellow tennis balls and failed miserably. And so they had to bring the white tennis balls back. Anyway, in the 70s they started using yellow tennis balls again. But remember the short shorts we used to have to wear, guys? Now you've got to wear the baggy long shorts. And the training was a little different. No one ever stretched. Stretching, we didn't stretch before or after. And if it was a hot day, they didn't want you to drink any water because that was bad for you. You take salt tablets. And remember back in the late 50s, the cigarettes were good for you because it built your lungs up and gave you endurance. I think the tiebreaker and open tennis were 2 great changes to the game. But during the 20 years that I was the tournament director of the Sony Ericsson now, it's called the Sony Ericsson, I think the biggest change that I saw was that in women's tennis. The quality, the power of women's tennis today, I think, is the biggest change that I witnessed. When our first tournament in 1985, there were 2 players, Martina and Chrissy Everett. And there was a young player that actually lost to Chrissy in the semifinals. She was 14 years old. She was Steffi. That's right. Today, from the first round on, you've got great women's tennis matches. So those are some of the changes that I've seen, but tennis connects people, and that doesn't change. And tennis is a sport of a lifetime, and you'll develop friends for a lifetime. And it's a great privilege that I've had to play tennis all these years and to be a part of Colorado. So again, I'd like to thank you for this honor.